All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Vincenza. I am a graduate research assistant at Boston College, and I am a project coordinator for the Special Education Professional Development Series. And today I have with me Allison.
Hi, my name is Allison Naneman. I'm a longtime special educator, and I also teach one of the graduate special education classes here at Boston College.
So we're going to start with a couple of questions, and Allison's going to tell us all about ADHD. So first, what is ADHD?
So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and it's a condition in which people don't have the ability to sustain attention or to kind of regulate their impulses. So typically when most of us, we try to focus and we try to be productive, that's based out of our executive functioning system, and we use 3 different kind of aspects of executive functioning. So we use inhibitory control, and that's kind of our ability to stop or to manage those really automatic physical or cognitive impulses. And then we use our selective attention, and that's our ability to kind of focus in on what's most salient or what's most important and to ignore distractions. And then finally, we use our cognitive flexibility, and that's our ability to kind of switch our attention back and forth between stimuli or to shift how we're thinking based on the circumstances around us. So ADHD occurs kind of when these systems fall apart or they don't work like they're supposed to. So ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it's what we call one of the high incidence disabilities, and that simply means that it's really one of the more common disabilities that we see. There are 3 types of ADHD. There's the inattentive type, and that accounts for about 27% of cases of ADHD. And that's what we used to just call ADD. So these are kids who seem to be daydreaming a lot. They have a hard time following through on a task or following through on directions, or they just kind of lose interest and focus in what we're talking about. The second type is the hyperactive type, and that accounts for maybe about 18% of cases, and these are the kids that seem to always be on the go, and they're bouncing off the walls, and they blurt out answers, and they have a hard time waiting their turn. Those are the hyperactive kids. And then the most common type is the third type, and that's the combined type, and that's where we just see a combination of both the inattentive and the hyperactive features.
Great. So what are some characteristics of ADHD that teachers might see in the classroom?
So the characteristics are going to vary a little bit depending on individual and depending on the type of ADHD, but there are some characteristics that we kind of expect to see with these students. So there are things like having a short attention span, like being impulsive or distractible. We see a lot of kids who are hyperactive. They may become frustrated really easily. They may seem to lack motivation or get bored really easily. We also might see kind of a breakdown of social skills with these students. These are students that also seem to have a hard time following the rules because they don't quite understand the consequences of their action because of that impulsivity. We also see that they struggle with organization. They might not interact well with peers and with other adults. And they don't necessarily multitask very well until they've reined in kind of that organization and time management. The other thing that we see that's a little quirky is that kids with milder ADHD only seem to be inattentive if they're not interested. So we'll hear a lot of times they can sit down and do puzzles for hours. They're not inattentive, but then if you give them a book or you give them a worksheet, suddenly they can do it for 30 seconds and then they're gone somewhere else. So it may not be strict inattention. It might be a little bit context dependent.
Great. What are some strategies or interventions that can be used with students with ADHD to help them be more successful in the classroom?
So one of the things that it's really important that we remember as teachers is to kind of recognize and capitalize on the strengths of students with ADHD because they really have quite a few. So they tend to be really innovative and really creative. They have great leadership potential because they can kind of see a lot of moving parts, and they like to have a little bit of participation in a lot of different things. We also see that they're really high energy, which can be particularly helpful as other students are losing momentum. These students will kind of carry things forward. They're great at brainstorming, which is really good in group discussions, and it's a good role for them in small group activities. They're good at multitasking. Like I mentioned earlier, once we teach them the foundational skills. So once they've got organization down, once they understand time management, they multitask fairly well. They're hardworking, and they really have a pretty good stamina for work, so long as they're well engaged. I know that can kind of be the tricky part,
Right.
but if we can figure out what holds them, then they're really going to work hard for us. They're very curious. They really like to learn new things. They're intuitive problem solvers, and they're really good at encouraging classmates and encouraging the people around them. So that's kind of the strengths perspective. If we're looking at kind of what we can do to address some of the more challenges of students with ADHD, teachers have a lot of behavioral interventions that they can choose to implement. So one of the things that we want to do is to kind of develop self-advocacy skills. So that idea of like, when do I advocate, how do I advocate, and what do I advocate for? And starting at kind of a basic level, we really want to see students advocating to take a break, or advocating to use a fidget, or advocating to work standing as they need those supports. We also want to start developing strategies for self-regulation. So this is kind of being in a positive emotional state to be productive and to be good learners. One of the tools that we use a lot with kind of elementary age students with ADHD is the zones of regulation tool. So usually this gives students like 3 or 4 emotional states, and it helps them identify what is their current emotional state and how can they adjust to a state that's more productive and is better for learning. Another thing that we want to do is work on time management, and there are a lot of tools and techniques that we can do for that. We can use timers, we can use a dry erase marker to kind of draw on a clock when an assignment should be finished. We can check in with students to see how their pacing is going. And then if students have a longer assignment or a longer project, we can kind of work with them to break it up into more manageable chunks and talk about how long should each of these components take you. So those kinds of things across the age span can be really helpful. We want to work on organizational skills. So that's both teaching students how and why to be organized, and then kind of finding the systems that work for individual students. And the final thing that we want to do is find that like sweet spot, if you will, of sensory input. So we all need different amounts of sensory stimulation. If we get too much, we're overwhelmed, and if we get too little, we lose focus. So we want that like Goldilocks zone. And the fact of the matter is, for most students with ADHD, classrooms tend to be understimulating. So using some really basic things like fidgets or background music or motor breaks or to work standing can be really helpful. If you've got access to a little more equipment, a lot of students like bubble seats so they can get a little bit of wiggle in their seat, or to tie an elastic band kind of around the legs of chairs so that they can do a little kicking at their seat as well. All of those things can help boost sensory stimulation so that students can stay focused on the task at hand.
Great, thank you. Well, if anyone has any questions, my email is going to be at the end of this video, so you can email me and I can pass on some questions to Allison.
Sure.
So, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video today. It was brought to you by the Urban Catholic Teacher Corps in conjunction with the Archdiocese of Boston and faculty from Boston College. If you have any questions or would like to learn more about the Special Education Professional Development Initiative, reach out to us at these options here. Thank you.